Have you noticed this pattern before? The more you care, the further they seem to drift. The more you reach out, the more they pull back. The more you try to prove how right this connection is, the more they seem to question it. It makes no logical sense. You watch other people in relationships that look, from the outside, far less intense than yours, and they're together, steady, uncomplicated, almost boring by comparison. Meanwhile, you're stuck in a cycle of closeness and distance that never quite resolves either way. One week you feel like you've never been closer to anyone in your life. The next week you're rereading a text for the 5th time, trying to figure out what changed. There's a real psychological explanation for this. Not fate, not energy, not a cosmic test designed specifically for you. Something Carl Jung actually wrote about. Not twin flames specifically, that's a modern spiritual term he never used, but the exact mechanism underneath this kind of intensity. And once you understand it, the whole pattern stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling like something you can actually work with, instead of something that just happens to you. Here's what this usually looks like day to day, in the small, almost embarrassing details nobody talks about out loud. You wake up, and before your feet touch the floor, you check your phone. Not out of curiosity, out of need. Did they respond? What does the tone mean? Are things okay or not? Your mood for the entire day gets decided by something outside your control before you've even gotten out of bed. That's not a small thing. That's your nervous system handing the keys to someone else every single morning, without your permission, without you even noticing it's happening. The false solutions don't help, though they feel like they should. Over-explaining a text so there's no room for misinterpretation. Sending a second message to clarify the first one, then immediately regretting it. Reading old conversations, scrolling back months, looking for reassurance that was already given once and somehow isn't enough anymore. Checking when they were last active, noticing exactly how long they took to reply, and building an entire emotional narrative around those minutes. Here's the moment worth sitting with honestly. If some part of you already suspects that what you're calling love has started to feel more like managing a fear, that you're not really thinking about them so much as thinking about whether you're safe with them, that suspicion is worth taking seriously. It doesn't mean the connection isn't real. It doesn't mean what you feel is fake or exaggerated. It means something else has gotten tangled up inside it, something that predates this relationship entirely. Before going further, it's worth being upfront about something. Jung never wrote about twin flames. That term comes from later spiritual traditions, not from analytical psychology. And it's important to say that plainly instead of pretending otherwise. What Jung did write about, extensively, across decades of clinical work, is the mechanism that makes a connection like this feel so consuming. And once you see that mechanism clearly, the label you put on the relationship almost stops mattering. Jung used the term complex to describe an emotionally charged cluster of memory, feeling, and belief that can act almost independently of your conscious will. A complex isn't a flaw or a diagnosis. Everyone has them. But when one gets activated, it's as if a separate operating system takes over for a while. You can know, rationally, sitting calmly by yourself, that sending another message is a bad idea. You can even say it out loud to a friend. And an hour later, in the grip of the complex, you send it anyway. That gap between what you know and what you do is the complex operating exactly as Jung described it. He also wrote about projection, the tendency to place a part of your own psyche, often a part you haven't developed or even acknowledged, onto another person, and then relate to that projection as if it were simply who they are. You don't just see them, you see them plus everything you've unconsciously loaded onto them. Picture someone who feels quietly trapped in their own life. Obligations, caution, a habit of playing it safe that started so early they don't remember choosing it. Then they meet someone who seems wildly free, spontaneous, unbothered by other people's opinions. Someone who says what they think and does what they want without apparent cost. The pull toward that person can feel like fate, like recognition, like finding a missing piece. Often, though, it's projection. The freedom isn't only being recognized in the other person. It's being borrowed, temporarily, from a part of the self that's been sitting unused for years. That doesn't make the connection fake. It makes it a mirror. And mirrors are only troubling when we mistake them for the whole picture. When we forget that what we're seeing includes our own reflection. A few patterns are worth naming in detail here, because odds are at least one of them is running quietly in your version of this story right now. The first is amplified abandonment fear. If there's a history, a parent who left, physically or emotionally, a pattern of conditional love in childhood where affection came with strings attached, an intense connection doesn't create that fear from nothing. It reactivates it at full volume, using this new person as the trigger. Suddenly, you're not managing normal relationship anxiety, the kind anyone might feel with someone new. You're managing a much older fear, a fear that's decades old, that simply found a fresh target to attach itself to. The second is the autonomous complex in action, and this is the part that tends to feel the most confusing from the inside. You promise yourself, with total sincerity, that you'll wait for them to reach out first this time. You even feel proud of the decision. An hour later, you're typing a message anyway, telling yourself, this one is different, this one doesn't count. This one is just checking in. That's not weak willpower, and it's not a character flaw. That's a part of the psyche operating outside conscious control, exactly the way Jung described a complex behaving, like a smaller personality inside you that has its own agenda. The third pattern is the weight the other person feels, even when you're certain you're hiding it well. Gentle words can still carry pressure underneath them. A text that reads as completely casual on the screen can carry 3 days of anxious waiting behind it. And somehow, that weight gets transmitted anyway. People tend to sense this, even when they can't name what they're sensing. Even when nothing you've said or done looks needy on paper. And most people, when they feel that kind of unspoken pressure, instinctively step back from it, however softly and kindly it was delivered. The fourth pattern is the cycle all of this creates together. You cling out of fear of losing them. They pull back to protect their own space, their own sense of autonomy. Their pulling back confirms your fear, proves it was justified all along. Your fear, now confirmed, tightens the grip even further. Around and around it goes, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. It's worth naming plainly. This loop isn't fate, and it isn't proof the connection was never real or never special. It's a feedback loop, a closed system running on its own logic, and feedback loops can be interrupted, but only from the inside. Not by managing the other person's behavior more carefully. Not by finding the perfect wording for the next message. Not by waiting for them to change first. So what actually breaks the cycle? Not suppressing the feelings and pretending they've gone quiet when they haven't. Not faking indifference while quietly falling apart underneath a calm exterior, hoping nobody notices the effort it's taking. Something more specific than either of those, and considerably harder to do. The first move is awareness, honestly separating what's love from what's need, which sounds simple and almost never is. A useful question to actually sit with, not just read and move past. Do I love who they really are? Or do I love what having them solves for me? What voids does their attention fill? What does their silence threaten to expose? That's not a comfortable question, and it rarely has a clean, single answer. Most of the time, it's some honest mixture of both. But asking it seriously, more than once, starts to loosen the fusion between the two. The second move is acceptance, looking directly at the origin of the fear without needing to resolve it in one sitting, without needing it neatly wrapped up by the end of this video, or even this year. If abandonment is the wound underneath this, that wound deserves to be looked at with real support, whether that's therapy, honest journaling done consistently rather than once, or any practice that actually gets you underneath the surface reaction, instead of just managing it in the moment it flares up. This is slow work. It doesn't respond well to urgency. The third move is withdrawing the projection, and this one is often the most practical place to start. Take whatever quality you admire most in them, the thing that first pulled you in, and ask honestly how you might begin developing that same quality in yourself. If they seem remarkably free, ask what one small, real, unglamorous step toward more freedom in your own life would actually look like this month. Not to copy them, not to become a version of them, but because the pull you feel toward that trait is pointing at something in you that's ready to grow, whether or not this relationship ever resolves. One important caution here, because this idea gets misunderstood constantly, especially online. If you're practicing detachment as a strategy to bring them back, treating it as a technique, something to perform correctly so they'll notice and return, counting the days like a countdown to a reaction, that isn't detachment. That's the same need wearing a calmer outfit. Real detachment doesn't have an agenda attached to it. It's not a move in the relationship, not a clever final play. It's a change in you that would be worth making even if they never came back at all, even if you never heard from them again. Here's what it tends to feel like on the inside when this actually starts to shift. And it's worth being honest that this happens slowly and unevenly, not in one clean breakthrough moment. You'll notice a day, then eventually a few days in a row, where you don't think about them constantly. Not because you're forcing yourself not to, gritting your teeth through it, because your attention finally has somewhere else to go. Energy that was tied up entirely in monitoring the relationship starts showing up in other places. Work you'd let slide for months, friendships you'd quietly neglected without meaning to, your own body, your own rest, hobbies you used to enjoy before all your bandwidth got absorbed by one person. You'll still love them. That doesn't disappear, and it isn't supposed to. But the loving stops needing a specific outcome attached to it in order to feel bearable day to day. You can want to be with someone and, at the same time, be genuinely okay if that doesn't happen. Those two things, wanting and being okay without it, can coexist, even though it doesn't feel possible from inside the anxious version of this. It's worth being honest here, since a lot of content on this exact topic overpromises in ways that end up causing more pain later. This is not a guaranteed method for getting someone to come back. Some people, after this kind of internal change, do find the other person moves closer again. That happens, and it's worth acknowledging plainly rather than either denying it or treating it as some kind of automatic law you can rely on. But the actual value of this work doesn't depend on that outcome, and it shouldn't be sold to you as if it does. It stands on its own, because the person you become through it, steadier, less governed by old fear, less willing to abandon yourself to keep someone else close, is the same person either way, whether or not the relationship resolves the way you originally hoped it would. Jung used the term conjunctio, sometimes translated as sacred marriage, to describe the union of opposites within a single psyche, the masculine and feminine, the conscious and unconscious, coming into a working relationship inside one person. It's important to be clear about what that actually means. It is not a promise about reuniting with another person. It's a symbol for becoming whole within yourself. That distinction matters because it points to where the real work is actually happening. Inside you, in that quiet, internal negotiation between fear and self-trust. Not in whether they text back tonight, or next month, or ever. There's also something worth saying about time, because healing like this rarely moves in a straight line. You might have a genuinely good week, calm, focused,